Triambakam yajamahe sugantim pushtivardhanam urvarukamiva bandhanam mrityurmukshyamamritat
Hi, this is Amelia Eon Karis.
Hey everyone, it's Satya, and you're listening to Love, Sex, and the Hidden Agenda. So I was just thinking about relationships and how fascinated you and I are with relationships and everything about them, the past, the present, the future. And I mean, with all the relationship types that you've had, the experiences that you've had, the alternative relationships and so forth, I'm just thinking, and the divorce rates, the way they are, and, all that we've seen in our lifetime, just with gay marriage and so many things changing and so many people experimenting. So what's next? Like what, where do you think we're headed? I feel like we're evolving to something completely different, because obviously what was going on in the 50s, isn't, that's dying, that's going away, that's just evident. It's obvious, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's how I see it too. It's like a thing of the past. For me, I know a lot of people are still kind of adhering to those old, relationship structures or desiring that, but I never have, as I don't know if it's, the way I grew up, if it's the parents I had and the time that I was living, the place I was living. I'm sure that all has a lot to do with the, my personal perspective and the way
Yeah, because your parents were a little older, right? So
Yeah, they had me later, although, they were in their late 30s, early 40s kind of, but that's normal now. So it's kind of interesting to see. But there was like a generational gap I noticed between my parents and my friends' parents. So my parents, they spent their teenage years or their sexual peak like in the 50s. Whereas most people my age, their parents spent their sexual peak in the 60s. So that's a very different parenting style, right? You've got the hippie kids, the flower children. Mm-hmm. But my parents were much more conservative than a lot of people's parents my age. But it's fascinating because they were still quite radical compared to their parents. Their parents were in World War II. They were raised during war and famines and all kinds of difficulties. And they were both from families with 5 or 6 kids. And, that was kind of normal. Whereas the generations later they stopped having so many children, and times really changed, right? We came out of the Depression and we haven't really been in a war that was that dramatic. In their time, they experienced, TV and radio and we experienced the internet, and, so a huge evolution of the way that we relate, right, to each other. And so there's this huge gap between, what my parents experienced and in relationship and dating and sexuality than for my generation. Very different, because not only am I leapfrogging them just because I'm 2 generations younger, but it's like the way I see it, our collective consciousness is that I've inherited not only the issues that my parents still haven't worked out from that time in the 50s, but also the generation after them, the hippies and the whole love revolution. I was really influenced by that growing up in San Francisco. And I kind of experienced my revolution of love or summer of love in the 90s. The 90s was like a huge 60s revival with the whole rave scene, and all of the psychedelics and, you know, the party scene when I was in my 20s was very reminiscent of the hippies, right? It was kind of like following
Woodstock or something,
footsteps. Yeah, like the technology version of what they created, sort of this revolution of love and breaking the boundaries of like, well, maybe we don't want to be housewives, maybe we don't want to be these feminine submissive types. We want to be equal to men, and our orgasms matter, right? And so there was that whole movement of women like stepping into their sexual liberation, whereas my mother's generation, like, she was quite radical for her generation. She moved from New York to California, which, you know, that was really far away.
Wow. Yeah.
To get away from her family. And she was in a Protestant house and she married a Catholic. That was radical. And he was actually an Orthodox, but then they both became Catholic together. That was like the common ground. So religion was a big deal. And family marriages were a big, you know, like the families were still very animate on who you could and couldn't marry. Whereas I think in the hippie generation, it was sort of like more relaxed. You know, they fell in love, they got married, or they had kids outside of marriage. That was all very common. There was a lot of single moms around the hippie generation, where in the 50s that just didn't happen. Like, people stayed married. Like, my parents, when they got divorced, I was 16, or between like 14 and 16. They were in the process of separation or whatever. And that was quite radical. You know, I think I was there was only one other friend I had who had a divorced parent. Everybody else's parents were married. So, but then you see after that, you know, it's very common in California, like large numbers of people's parents are divorced. It's more common than that they're married.
It's way over 50%. Yeah.
Right. So something's changing, right? Like our ideas about relationship are changing. And I've just always found it really fascinating because as a very young child, I felt like nobody was doing it right. Like, who made me the judge? But I just found that like, this isn't what I want. I don't want that. So I experimented so much in my own ways of relating. Like, I know in high school, I didn't want a boyfriend. Like, all my friends had boyfriends. And I'm like, why the hell would you want a boyfriend when you're this young? Like, that just, don't you want to just play around and like hang out with guys? Like, why would you want to be serious? Like, don't you want to wait till you're older to get that serious? I don't know. It just didn't make any sense for me. So I didn't do that. And in my relationships with men, it was very natural and very free. Like, there was no ownership. I didn't understand the whole jealousy and possessiveness because it didn't make sense to my innocent mind. Like, I just wanted to play and enjoy each other. And I didn't understand why these girls were getting all, you know, possessive and psychotic and like wrapped up with one guy. It's like, you haven't had any experience. How do you know this is the one? I don't know. It was it was strange for me. But I was different from most people, you know, and then it put me on this weird trajectory of how to relate because I related so differently. I was more about, I personally needed a lot of freedom. I didn't like when someone got obsessive with me. It scared me. Like, if they got possessive or jealous, even girlfriends, if they got jealous of me, it terrified me. It felt like, why are you doing that? You're acting like a crazy person, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel loving. It feels suffocating, and maybe that comes from, you know, being neglected so much in my childhood. I'm not used to someone giving me that much attention, right? So it could be a part of that, but I found it out of balance and distorted energetically, like someone's trying to control another person instead of just trusting that their connection is what it is. You know, they're like trying to make it something it's not.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that more and more people are waking up to this, as I see, because a lot of people are cycling through relationships much faster now than any other time in history. And I know you and I both kind of share this, which brought us to doing this podcast, because we both have had a lot of relationships, a couple of marriages, and some alternative relationships that weren't normal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that we're still evolving. I know for myself, I'm still figuring that out. And, you know, I was in San Francisco in the early 90s. I was in a marriage with a man, but we also had a girlfriend. So it was the three of us in this triad of a relationship, and we were very proud of it. And I think a lot of people found that extremely strange and appalling and threatening. So what would happen is, you know, a lot of other men would kind of try and convince their girlfriend or partner to be in a threesome, but it didn't. It wasn't created. Our relationship wasn't thought through. We were just so young, and it happened very naturally, and from a very carefree, open place. Now, you know, it's not like we could sustain it that long. It lasted like a year and a half. But at the time, that kind of relationship was so shocking, even
so
though
taboo
we were in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Yes, so taboo and so triggering. You know, we would go into parties or places or events, and we started a company together, so we were quite known as this, you know, threesome. And it just created a wave of havoc, you know, a lot of questions, a lot of like, how does it work? And it's like, I don't know, we're figuring it out. But what it did for me is it like put me in a place where I know that I want to be in a relationship where, you know, honesty and freedom, not freedom to like go do whatever your kind of lustful desires are. That's not what I'm talking about, but freedom in a sense of like a liberation of, you can just totally be yourself and be authentic to what you're attracted to or not attracted to. Like, there's no reason to hide, because I think that the reason why so many relationships have failed, from what I look at it, is because of shame and a lack of freedom. So people either feel trapped, or they're so ashamed at their desires and the things that they think about or what they do when their partner or spouse isn't around, that's what breaks up the relationships. That's what I've noticed when I look at them. Like my father, he was hiding that he was having an affair with this woman he worked with, you know, and I could see it the whole time. My mom was totally blind to it. And
oh gosh. And
I was thinking, how can you be blind to it? You're not sleeping with the guy, you know, like you guys have a terrible sex life. That's obvious, you know, like, and of course he's a very, you know, vivacious dude, and she's always sick and tired, you know. And so to me, it was like, well, of course he's going to be attracted to someone. Of course he's going to want to do this. What's the problem? Why is everybody so shocked?
Wow.
I didn't understand why people were shocked. It's like, that's just natural to me that he would need physical affection and attention. And then the whole like taboo they placed over it is where I was just like, wow, you're just going to shame this person so intently that they're going to get more closeted, more self-sabotaging, more twisted up inside themselves. And I just think, why are we doing that? Like, it disturbs me that we do that to each other, that we run relationships out of like shame and guilt. And I think this is the old patriarchal church that conditioned us to take away our power, right? Because our sexual power is the seat of our personal power. It's like, that is our life force. And so if they could shame it and cage it and possess it, well, then they control you.
Pin drop, mic drop. That's so deep right there. That's like, I'm descending into a giant
Yeah, I don't ever want to be controlled like that. And so I think that since I woke up from the church, I was 14 when the church kicked me out. Thank God, hallelujah, right at puberty. Like, I was a virgin. They called me a slut. I had never even kissed a boy. They said I was that's why they kicked me out of the church. So it was such an ironic thing. It's like, no, I've never actually even had sex, but all you guys are pedophiles. All you guys are fucking other women. Sorry for cussing, but we can do that, right? We can do that here, right? I think I've sworn many times.
Joe can always beep it out.
Okay. Well, these men that were kicking me out of the church for being improper, which wasn't me, right? I didn't do that. My best friend.
They probably wanted to have sex with you or something. I mean, they probably saw your energy and your intelligence, and they're like, we got to get rid of this one.
That I was a witness to many of abuses. I witnessed a lot of pedophilia and weird sexual abuse, and I was sort of the keeper of a lot of secrets at a very young age. I could see that what they were doing and what the church was doing was wrong, and I was questioning it, even though I was still behaving as a good girl. I had something in me that they couldn't break, and I had an awareness that disturbed them. And so, when my best friend, when it was found out that she had sex with a boy outside of the church, or whatever,
or outside of marriage or whatnot. Yeah.
Well, she was 13, right? We were kids, but she was being abused by her father, and her father was a deacon of the church, and the two of us were kind of inseparable. And I knew a lot of the things that were happening to her. And so I think that they were afraid that I would talk. So it was easier for them to just remove me from the situation altogether. Yeah. And at the time it was super disturbing, but it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me, because then all of the lies, I could see through everything. And that's when I got away from these sick people and started to be really thankful that I was no longer entrapped and being programmed by these, really disturbing double messages. Like, they would preach at church, you shouldn't have marital affairs, but I was the babysitter for most of the families in the church, and I knew who was having an affair with who. Like, I could see most of the men were having affairs, and I could see, and I knew of a lot of child pedophilia that was going on, molestations, rape, all of that was happening within the families, within pastors and the kids. Like, I knew of all of that. I was witness to it. And so I had all this information that was like, you guys are all hypocrites. Like, but I somehow, it was normal for me because I grew up in it, right? So I knew all of that, but I wasn't speaking to it. But the second that they kicked me out, it was like, oh, thank God I'm away from these sick people.
Yeah.
And so I just never wanted to be one of those wives in one of those kind of marriages, because those wives had no voice. They were completely, they were all sick. Like, we had the highest number of breast cancer and weird illnesses. Like, my mom was always on the couch sick with a headache. Like, always sick and tired. Almost all the women in our church were sick all the time. And I was like, what is this epidemic of illness? Like, is it they thought maybe it's the power lines, maybe there's some weird energy grid here, but it was that sick church, I feel, and the weird programs they were putting in the minds of these women to disempower them. So they had no sex drive. They were all complacent, good wives, letting the men do all kinds of horrors. And when the kids, like my sister, would say, this pastor has molested me in my voice lesson, and I was there and witnessed it, and my mom and all the secretary and all the women she told were like, oh, come on, honey, that didn't really happen. And I'm like the 8-year-old kid going, no, it happened to her. I saw it. She's telling the truth. And they would all go, oh yeah, no, she didn't. That didn't really happen. He's a pastor. And it's like, I don't care who he is. I saw him do it. And so they make you think that you're crazy, like you're making it up.
Right.
So all of that was going on. And I just grew up feeling like I don't want to be that stupid, dumbed down woman.
Oh my God.
I knew that happens when they marry these kind of guys.
Right.
So I went a very radical route. I left the country. I've been living on my own since I was 17. I needed to get the hell away from that kind of Christian belief system. And I started to meet other people, more free thinkers. And so, I can't say that all my experiments were, golden, in the sense there was a lot of pain and difficulties trying out these new alternate relationship styles. But I do see something beautiful emerging on the horizon, and I see the collective consciousness waking up to it. And I see those of us like you and I and others who've been really like not settling for, I don't know if it's like some false sense of security, or who are not settling for status quo, or who are not settling for the prescribed relationship. We're going to find something more satisfying in relationships. That's my hope, or that's what drives me to do the work that I do, because I know that the second that somebody has like possessed me or starts claiming me. There's one thing to be proud to be with someone and to have healthy boundaries, and to have a certain level of a very clear communication and commitment with the person. I'm not saying that I don't want that, but when it becomes controlling, it could be a woman to the man also. It's not all men, so please don't hear me wrong. Because I see a lot of the women, but some of the guys listening might be, because a lot of men, and I think a lot of the guys who listen to this podcast have had horrible women in their lives, whether it was their mothers or a wife that, like really abusive, dominating women who have totally like spun in the other direction. So, I think all of us have experienced some sort of relationship horror. And then some of us just get stopped. And I'm very committed to not being stunted in my growth. I think that relationships are designed for our growth and evolution. Like we were hurt in relationships, but we also heal in relationships. Like we need a relationship to heal the hurt of a past relationship. we can do so much healing on our own, but then we're not really healed until we test it out in a relationship, right? Like to trust again, to love again. So relationships are going to keep happening and evolving. And I think, friendships are a beautiful way, and the self-help movement and all of these retreats and personal growth that's happening, like people are starting to learn how to communicate better and more openly and more honestly and find deeper connection within themselves. And from there, I think we're going to experience a new wave of relationships that are more satisfying, more authentic, more wholesome.
Yeah. It's not going to look like what it looks like now. Although most of it is just all in secret, even the people that, have stayed married and quote, have not gotten a divorce. There's so much stuff going on in secret that isn't apparently accepted or discussed. And so, yeah, just that it would all be out in the open would be fantastic for all of us, because it's just feeding the darkness.
To not have to feel ashamed for having certain needs and desires, right? Like how many married people feel completely ashamed, or even if they're just in a committed relationship, to even have an attraction or a turn on from someone else. Like majority of them, they're going to feel like, oh my God, I can't tell my wife or my husband that I just had this amazing encounter with a stranger that got me super excited.
Yeah.
Like, even if it was just like a glance, like so many men are completely shamed for looking at a beautiful woman walking by. I mean, it's that bad.
Yeah.
Like the shame is so base level, like on such stupid things that people are terrified to express themselves. And they're even terrified to explore what the heck they're even looking at, right? It's just so instinctual. Like a gorgeous woman walks by, they glance at her, and the next thing they know, they're busted and like their wife is treating them like crap for the next week. That's just really common. I've heard that story a million times.
Yeah. Well, on another note, I think a part of that is the woman thinking what the other woman thinks. Like, oh, if another woman sees, like if I walk in and I see a man oogling me and he's with a woman, even I will probably disrespect him and think to myself, that poor woman. Like I'll think, oh, I feel sorry for that woman he's with, and that's a lot of women who do that are thinking, oh, but the women who see you do this are going to think something of me, almost more than like, we don't really, maybe they don't care so much that he's looking, but it's the perception also of other people, or I might think, oh, that guy's not a relationship guy or not husband material or something like that. So even I have that kind of judgment, while at the same time, I'm completely, open to different types of things and different types of relationships. But there is so much work we have to do and so much healing we have to do. And what I have to take a deep breath on is when I start to think, good people in average relationships, like how much that's going to shift and how much all of that can't even shift until all the other stuff shifts, which is all of the other stuff, like all of the secrets and all the pedophilia and all of the and the parasite and just the whole thing. And
I think, when I just want to back up for a second, because when you're talking about like how you view a guy who looks at a beautiful woman walking through a room who's sitting with someone else, it's like, what I see is that we've been stripped, because it could be the other way around. Like it could be a woman looking at a gorgeous man walking by and she's married, right? Yeah. We're stripped of knowing ourselves and our own instinctual nature, where it's been replaced by judgment and shame.
Yes.
and confusion. So the husband or the person who's looking at the beautiful object, person walking by or whatever, looking with desire, has been shamed to the connection of their own base desires to the point where they don't trust themselves.
Right.
There's no trust left. That person has been stripped of self-trust because their partner has been judging them and now they're judging themselves. Why do I do that? The guy probably goes home. I've counseled so many couples in this exact situation where a guy gets turned on innocently and the woman can't let it go.
That's kind of silly. I mean, to go to that degree is ridiculous.
No, it's really common. It's so common that it's like women feel justified in it and men feel so ashamed of it that they then turn to porn or they turn to an affair or something because they're being starved of what their base level, they're being starved of just a natural reaction to something. And it's creating dissonance inside our systems. It's creating disconnection between our sexuality and our heart and our mind, with all of this dogma and boundaries that have been placed. And I think, in the 60s, they ripped that off and were like, anything goes. And then, we got tons of STDs and AIDS and all that epidemic stuff. And then the Christians came in again. Shame on you. You are going to be cursed by STDs if you think that you can just go out and sleep with whoever you want. And so then there was like,
well, I don't even know
wave of fear.
Yeah. And I mean, there's some people who say that even AIDS was just created by somebody and just put into the system. But I mean, boy, did that get used heavily for people to be, again, have more control over our sexuality, more shame. So
exactly. So I think
we're at time.
We are. And that's what happens when, people are getting liberated. People are starting to feel the sense of their power. And then they had to inject something to control the population again. So brings us to back to the parasite, but we'll save that for the next episode. Thanks for listening. You're going to have to stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Thanks for hanging out with us. If you'd like to contact us and stay in touch with us, you can find us at lovesexagenda.com. That's lovesexagenda.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram, Love, Sex, and the Hidden Agenda. Dia